I was on I-70 in Colorado going towards Utah. I was pulled over at a gas station at 8 p.m. Fueling up, I noticed a couple of attractive women pumping gas. On the other side of the pump was a man in his late 40s just staring at these young women without notice of anything else going on around him. I walk inside to go grab some food for the next few hours of driving. When I come out, I see both the younger woman's car and the older man's truck are gone. I decided to hang out at the gas station for the next hour to catch a little sleep before hitting the road again. After driving a few more hours, I pull over at another gas station. The young women are there and getting gas and eating some food on a picnic table. They looked like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any sign of the man in the truck, but I can't say I was looking very hard for it. This is the point in the story where I start looking like a creep as well. I can't say I didn't stare at them a bit. I mean, they were good looking women. As I was watching them leave, I see in the next parking lot over some headlights turn on, and it's the same man as before. He leaves when the women leave once again. I thought to myself, that's a bit weird, but could just be a coincidence, as there weren't many places to pull over. I leave a few minutes later and catch up to them. Now this guy is riding their tail with his high beams on. I decided to slow down and stay a distance behind the truck. 10 minutes or so later, the woman pulled over once again to most likely get this guy off their tail. With a sign of relief, the truck keeps going and I continue on my way. About 1 mile down the road, the guy just pulls off to the side of the highway, so I pull off a mile or so down the road again. Sure enough, the women drive by and the guy is still following them. At this point, we are out in the middle of nowhere and too many coincidences have happened. I called the cops to alert them, and about 15 minutes later, the cops pulled over the guy. I could have just seen too many horror movies that started like this and overreacted, but you never know. You gotta be better safe than sorry. I was driving from Atlanta, Georgia to Lexington, South Carolina with my girlfriend to visit my parents. I like to drive at night since there are less people on the road and I could take my time. At around 3 a.m. or so, we were making good time. I had stopped at a gas station and picked up some coffee for us. My girlfriend was sleeping and I'm listening to a quiet radio humming away. I start getting a little drowsy and take a sip. The road was pretty much empty and there was no cars in sight except for a couple that I spotted on the side of the road. In the distance, I can make out what looks like a hitchhiker, or what I think is one, but can't really tell due to such a low light. As I get closer, I start to notice other things, like how the person is kinda thin and tall. I'm right up on this thing now, and at about 20 feet, it turns around and locks eyes with me as I pass by. This was no person, and it is the most terrifying thing I have seen in my life. It was a deer, or at least I tell myself that. I've seen deer stand on their hind legs to fight, but they still have a deer posture when they do. Not only that, but I was watching this thing walk for about 30 seconds from first seeing it in the distance to passing it. The posture it had was human, arms back and chin down, but the worst part was the eyes, or lack thereof. In their place were 2 large black pits. I'll never forget the stare down it gave me. The instant I passed it, I had the only panic attack I've ever had in my life. I had to wake up my girlfriend to keep calm enough to get to an exit with a large enough gas station a few miles away. After we pulled into the station, I had a complete meltdown. I started crying harder than I ever thought I could. I couldn't talk or breathe or do anything, and I wanted to just curl into a ball and cry. After around 30 minutes or so, she finally gets me to calm down enough to tell her what happened. While I don't think she believed what I think I saw, she knew that I was convinced and legitimately scared to death. Every once in a blue moon, I will dream about it and wake up in a cold sweat, and she will tease me about it, roll over, and just ignore me for the rest of the night. But I know what I saw, and I know it will haunt me for the rest of my life. This was probably about 15 years ago. I went to college 4 hours away from my hometown and would occasionally drive home for weekends to visit my family. My parents are divorced, and at the time my dad was living in a rather small apartment, so I would stay at my mom's ranch house out in the countryside. On one of these weekends, I was out late night with some friends at a bowling alley, and I was driving back to my mom's house during the late hours. Being that my mom lives out in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't uncommon to not see many or any other cars on the road during the drive. So I'm driving along these country roads, minding my business, when I notice I'm being followed by another car. At first, I don't think much of it, but then I notice the car starts swerving behind me. It's up pretty close on my bumper, definitely too close for comfort, and just constantly swerving, weaving back and forth. This goes on for a couple miles on these deserted, dark country roads, and nobody else is around. At this point, I'm pretty freaked out. The car isn't making any move to pass me despite having ample opportunity to do so, and there's no way that I'm stopping or pulling over or going straight home with this nutcase following me. So I basically start driving in circles, making as many turns as I can, trying to lose this guy. No luck. He is glued to my bumper and still constantly swerving. So I decide to start heading back into the city where I'd been hanging out with my friends. It's very early in the morning at this point, but the city does have a big highway, so I figured getting up to a higher speed with a well-lit road and some other cars around would be helpful. The car is still following me, matching my speed. He follows me for several miles until in a fit of panic, I pull a move of questionable safety and legality and swerve all the way over to the fast lane to an exit ramp at the last minute, surprising the car behind me enough that he missed the exit and presuming he had to go up to the next exit a few miles down the road. I booked it back through the town on the regular roads, driving about 30 to 40 over the speed limit in a total panic and rushed to get back to my mom's house. I make it back to her house without further incident. I was very paranoid at this point, and every pair of headlights I see behind me is making me freak out. To this day, I can't drive at night back to my mom's house in the countryside without thinking about it. Even typing this story is making me freak out. No idea what the swerving car's deal was, and never saw it again. Not sure what his intentions were, but he was clearly following me. I was driving to work one night, chatting on the phone with my wife to pass the time. It's about a 6 to 8 hour drive to the military base from my house. Ahead of me was somebody riding a motorcycle. The road we were on was pretty straight, but had some unpredictable curves because of the road loosely following the lake. The person ahead of me was going between 70 to 90 miles per hour and seemed generally familiar with the road, but then they just sailed straight over the edge of a 45 mile per hour curve going about 80. I was very shocked and hung up with my wife. I immediately pulled over, called 911, and put them in my pocket. I got my trauma kit from my trunk and put on my gloves. I was talking to the dispatcher and explaining what had happened. I stepped over the bank, and to my surprise, I didn't see a crumbled body in the sage, but it was a young guy, mid-20s. He was picking himself up off the ground about 75 feet ahead of me. He'd been launched from a motorcycle, which was in terrible shape about 30 feet from him. I told him to stay still and went through a quick evaluation. He was basically fine but super rattled. He ended up having a broken collarbone and a mild concussion. This story could have ended badly, but luckily this guy got out alive.